Well, hi everybody. Welcome. Don't need any more introduction, I guess. My name's Evan Kaler. If you're new here, I'm one of the pastors here at Anchor Point, and it is just a joy, really, truly a joy to be bringing the word this morning, to be teaching from what God has said and what God has shared with us. And so it's just an honor to be standing before you all this morning, and I hope that, as always, it's good for you as it's been for me to be prepping for this morning. God does this funny thing to a preacher where he just convicts the heck out of them when you're studying for a sermon. And so if I'm a sobbing mess up here, that's why. But I think I'll be able to hold it together. So yeah, we're continuing on in our parable series. It's been so much fun. We've started several weeks ago, looking through the different parables that Jesus was telling through his ministry, and these are like really familiar stories. We've done stories that some of us have heard dozens, if not like hundreds of times in church before, but there's still so much life and breath still in these stories that Jesus was sharing, and so it has been just a blast. And I'm excited to continue doing that. But before we get too deep into today's teaching, I just want to do a quick reminder. What is a parable? So at its very simplest, a parable is just a story with a lesson. A little more robust definition is that a parable is a simple but contextualized story that has topics that the hearers or the readers could touch, they could see, they could feel, and that lesson that's embedded inside is not just for them, but it's a timeless lesson that actually must be discovered. It takes a little bit of work. Parables aren't always super clear. Jesus, at some points, has to just sit his disciples down and say, okay, here's what I was trying to say, because you guys missed it. And so I'm excited. We have two parables today. But they're super short. I have 3 verses altogether. That's all the scripture that's going to be on the screen today is 3 verses, but still 2 parables. And so if you want to start turning there, we'll be in Matthew chapter 13, starting in verse 44. And the parables are the parable of the hidden treasure and the parable of the priceless pearl. So in the same way as our parables are short, my teaching today is going to be kind of short too. Because honestly, the main ideas in these parables are pretty straightforward. We don't have I don't need to dive into some theological treatise to explain what's going on in these parables today. And the only reason I might even hit like 20 minutes today is because it takes a little bit of work to get us there in the first place. And so if you're there, we're in Matthew 13, verse 44. If you don't have it, it'll be up on the screen for you. So, verse 44, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure, buried in a field, that a man found and reburied. Then, in his joy, he goes and sells everything he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. When he found one priceless pearl, he went and sold everything he had and bought it. And so this morning we have 2 pretty easily digestible stories. They're straightforward. There are 2 people, a man and a merchant, and they're searching for something that is really valuable to them. This man is digging for treasure. He's searching for this thing that'll make him rich. So much so that he's doing it in fields he doesn't even own. And he's looking for this treasure, devoted to this treasure. And he finds it and sells everything he has so that he can buy that field. The second story is a merchant who spends all of his time looking for nice pearls. And when he finds that one perfect pearl, he sells his whole business, everything he has, just to buy that pearl. And so both men end up with this thing that's of extreme value to them, but it cost them everything to get it. And not only that, but it takes work for them to find it in the first place. This man digging around in fields didn't just stumble upon this priceless treasure. He had to be digging for it. It was buried in the first place. And the man couldn't have just stumbled upon this priceless pearl, the merchant, but was looking for it, searching for it, and searching for it diligently. And so Jesus so far in Matthew 13 has shared a ton of different parables. We're nearing the end of his kind of parable discourse here. And he always began those parables with this line: the kingdom of heaven is like blank. And so according to these parables, what is the kingdom of heaven like? In the first story, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure buried in a field that a man is searching for. And in the second story, it's like a merchant searching for fine pearls. And so it's clear that Jesus is trying to tell us something about the kingdom of heaven, and that it is extremely valuable. And so this parable, this lesson, isn't just for information. There's something deeper here, because I could just tell you, the kingdom of heaven's valuable. Cool. So what does that mean for his disciples? What does that mean for us? What is Jesus trying to teach through this parable? And I believe that as he's teaching this in the short period of time, that if the kingdom of heaven is of this utmost value, then put in the work to find it and make sure you get it once you find it. Act like the man and act like the merchant. If the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, then if you want the kingdom of heaven, go dig it up. And if you want the kingdom of heaven, go search for that pearl and give everything for it. But here's the issue that I kind of run into, and the issue that was full of conviction for me. There's not really like good ways to mince words around these two parables, because they're pretty short, and Jesus doesn't stop and like explain them later. They sell everything. They sell everything to find their treasure. They sell everything to buy the pearl. They don't get to keep anything. They sell everything. That's what Jesus is saying. And so if it takes work to find the kingdom of heaven, it also seems to take sacrifice to get it. But here's the conviction point for me. I don't know about you guys. I think the sacrifice needs to be taken in context, because I don't know if the men thought that they were sacrificing a thing. The merchant had spent all of this time trying to find this priceless pearl, something that was so valuable to him. And he finally found it. And then he sat down and said, I don't know, is this really worth it? And spent a ton of time saying, I don't know if I have a really nice business, I got a really nice, all this other stuff. And then he finally decides to sell it. And it's like, I shouldn't have done that. I don't think so. He knew what he was searching for. In the same way, the man knew what he had found in the field. And he knew that everything he had was enough to sell, to buy that field, just so he could have the treasure that he had found. So here's my hard question. Do we find the kingdom of heaven valuable? Is the kingdom of heaven more valuable to you than anything else is? If acquiring the kingdom meant you had to sell everything that was dear to you, would you consider it a sacrifice? If I had to, I don't know, if I took like 5 minutes and started listing out things that were valuable to me, I could probably fill up a page and still have a lot more in the tank. It's really normal, like, to find value in things, especially in kind of this consumerist culture. We're told to value things. And I'm a big like hobby guy. So I could probably list out all of my hobbies in 5 minutes and still have more of those. But that's not even to start saying about like my wife, who I value more than those. This church, who I certainly value more than those, like a garden fresh tomato. I mean, come on. That is valuable. Yeah, and so all of these things that are like near and dear to my life, I find value in them. But I probably could take 5 minutes and not run out of stuff in the tank, of asking myself, what are things that I tend to find more valuable than the kingdom? And I was, really convicted really convicted this week. Just that Jesus is clear when he's talking this morning, talking to his disciples, that they saw this thing that was priceless and gave everything for it. And I want a little more of that. I want a little more of that vision to say, the kingdom of heaven is worth everything. And I don't want this morning to be like a guilt trip at all, because it kind of was for me, and I didn't like it. But what's so good about like what God does as you're studying the scriptures is that I didn't just stay in that guilty spot. I didn't just stay in that spot of like, woe is me, I'm a terrible Christian. All I do is value other things other than God. I didn't stay there, which is a beautiful thing. And I think that this parable is meant to be a reminder that is beautiful. The kingdom of heaven is so precious. The promise of God is that we're saved, that we can know God as a Father who loves us so dearly. And it's not because of our goodness, not because of our value, not because of how much we value him. And it's so good because we can join with Jesus as co-heirs of the kingdom of heaven and receive that reward of his righteousness, not our righteousness, but his righteousness. And there's no better news than that. The good news of the gospel is that though we have sinned, though we misplace our values, he loves us. And God sent his son for us, and he sent him to reconcile us back to him. And that all of our salvation, all that it requires from us, is to just have faith and trust in him. And that's the fun part, but the really hard part. Because trusting God means that we aren't God. And that's where God was thinking to me. That's what it means to sell everything. It's to give up everything of yourself and to say, I am not God, but you are. And when you give up that control, giving up that authority, it could feel like you're giving everything away. Because I don't know what's happening next week, but I'd like to. And I'd like to be in charge, that's for sure. But I don't. And so selling my hold, my grip on my future, selling my grip on my plan, selling my grip on even my day-to-day, feels like selling everything at times, but put in the right perspective, it's trusting God. And that is so worth it. And so here's our challenge from the parables today, is that trusting in God is worth it. There's something so valuable in the kingdom, so valuable. And as we go through this life, we're like constantly surrounded by things that are vying for our attention, vying for our affections. And so don't forget just how precious the kingdom is, just how precious the gift of salvation is. It'll take work to seek the kingdom. As the merchant put in the work, so will we, because there's chaos around us, distracting us, and there's fake pearls that aren't very good. But it'll always be worth the work. Now, I could end the sermon here. It's a pretty good one, right? Short, sweet, great. But I think that there's more here. And this is like the fun part of the parables. Because the surface level reading is like, yeah, that's good. That's good stuff. It's good for me, good for the church. We need to hear that. But there's usually a little treasure buried in the parables, pun intended. And so I love them. Like Matthew 13 is this chapter full of parables. We've done quite a few of them in our series so far. We started with the parable of the sower. We started talking about the wheat and the weeds. We talked about the mustard seed and the leaven. Now we're talking about this hidden treasure and the priceless pearl. And there's always this subject that is doing this thing. In this parable of the sower, there's a sower. He's got some seeds. He's planting those seeds. And in the parable of the mustard seed, there's this farmer planting these seeds. What's amazing is that it's really easy to like read ourselves into these stories. And I just did earlier this morning. Like, we are the man. We are the merchant. We're searching for this kingdom of heaven. But Jesus, earlier on, in some of his parables, sits his disciples down and starts to explain. This is what these parables mean. You guys missed it. And every time he does that, you guys can look, do your homework. Every time he does that, he explains that the man in the stories, the man in the parable is not us. It's not his disciples, it is God. And so in these parables, we see God as the subject doing these actions. And so let's apply that to our parables this morning. If the kingdom of God is like a treasure that a man searches for, then maybe, just maybe, God is searching diligently for the kingdom of heaven. If the merchant is searching for a priceless pearl and sells everything to buy that pearl, then it sounds like God is searching for that priceless pearl and selling everything he has to buy that pearl. And so the lesson that Jesus was really wanting his disciples to see here is, and by extension, us too, is that we are the precious treasure of the kingdom of heaven. This parable speaks to the heart of God, and it speaks perfectly to the heart of Jesus. And Jesus himself perfectly fulfilled what he's teaching in this parable. Jesus came to earth to seek and save the lost. The treasure he was seeking was his people, his bride, his church, you and me, all of those who would have faith. And he gave everything, and he suffered death, even death on a cross, to reconcile you and me back to God. He bought us back from death and sin and guilt, and now with joy, sharing in the joy that Christ had, we can say that we're his and he is ours. And so the hidden truth, the little treasure in these parables, is the heart of the gospel. You are valuable to God. For God so loved the world, he gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. God loved the world. That means you. That means me. It means all of us. It means every person we know. You and I are valuable to God. Our utmost identity as human beings is that we are loved, that we are cherished, that we are valued, that we're worthy of dignity. That it doesn't matter what we do, it doesn't matter how much we can perform, it doesn't matter what we place our values on. In the first place, we are valuable to God. And he has given everything, and he has searched diligently, and he will do it all again because of how valuable we are. Our two lessons from this morning are pretty closely intertwined. The kingdom of heaven is valuable for us because God sees us as valuable first. I don't think it would be a very fun kingdom to be a part of